Today we're going to talk about the roots of progressivism. So we're going to look at some of the things that happened during the progressive movement at the turn of the century, so moving from the 19th into the 20th century in the United States. So we're going to look at some things like they're going to reform the government in many different ways. In some ways, they're going to make it more democratic. In other ways, they're going to try to give more power to the government. And then we're going to see also some things like women's suffrage, as well as like child labor laws and things like that, as well as the prohibition movement. We're talking about that as well. So lots to cover today. So let's go. Let's get it started. So progressivism is a series of responses to problems in American society that had emerged from the growth of industry. So industry had grown, okay, especially in factories, and this is in reaction to the laissez-faire or the hands-off economics. So it's basically the free enterprise system where the government doesn't get involved at all in the economy. Okay, so some of the issues that were going on, poverty and filth and crime in cities, did make some doubt the free market system because many people felt like there was a certain class of people that were taking advantage of other classes of people. So the progressives belonged to both parties, so Republican and Democrat. So they were mostly urban, educated, middle-class Americans. Many of them were journalists. Many of them were social workers, educators, politicians, and even members of the clergy. And they thought that the way to fix society was to fix the government. Okay, so the government should be more in control of society. And so the big people behind this whole movement that kind of brought it out to light are the muckrakers. So muckrakers are journalists who were basically obsessed with scandal and corruption. So they were uncovering corruption in many areas, and that includes the beef industry. So like the meatpacking industry, when we're talking like Upton Sinclair, when he wrote The Jungle, that exposed some of the grossness of what was going on, as well as like the inhumane treatment of the cows, as well as like really poor conditions for the workers as well. Corruption in the oil industry, corruption in the government, and city life for the poor. So a lot of these journalists were just trying to find bad parts of society and bring it all to light. So one group wanted to make the government more efficient, and they wanted to use basically business management techniques. So they had two different proposals in order to do this. The first proposal was to divide the city into several departments. So to have city government with different departments like a parks department and a public works department and things like that, things that we actually still have. And then the people who run those are actually people who are hired, so who are experts in that field, and so they know how to efficiently run those departments. Okay, so instead of them being elected people, so whoever's popular gets to run that department, it's not like that. It's you have to apply, you have to have meet certain credentials and things like that. And another thing people wanted was a second proposal was to have a city manager instead of a mayor. So once again, a mayor is elected, but a city manager would have to meet certain credentials in order to be hired. Okay, it would be competitive in order to meet the criteria that the city council is looking for. And so many cities, even to this day, have city managers. They do also have mayors in most cities, but the city manager is kind of basically in charge of all those departments that we were talking about before. So like the parks, the public works, sewage, water, like all kinds of different things like that. So some of the reforms that they're going to happen are more democratic reforms, and so it's going to give a little bit more power to the people. So Robert La Follette is going to make Wisconsin a model of this progressive reform. And one of the ways he's going to do this is by changing the way people are selected to run for office. Okay, so he didn't like the way that the political conventions were run. And so basically what happened before this is party bosses controlled the selection of convention delegates. And then so those delegates would select a person to run for government, run for office, whatever role that might be, let's say president. And then that person who wins would be basically indebted to that party boss. Okay, so instead of that, La Follette decided, let's put the power in the hands of the people. Okay, so he introduced this idea of a direct primary. Now, this is something that we have in most states today. So basically, what it boils down to is every party member can vote for a candidate in order to run for office. So we've already been through primary season with this election, but I think it was in March when the primary was here in Illinois to decide on a Democratic candidate. And so if you are a Democrat, you could go to the polls and you could vote for, whichever at the time it was like Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard, and I think Elizabeth Warren was still in it at the time. So you could vote for any of those people, and then whoever won the most out of that would get the delegates. And then I'm pretty sure Biden won Illinois, if memory serves, because this was right around the time where a lot of those Democrats were jumping ship. So, but the whole idea of this anyway is that this idea is putting the power in the hands of the people. Okay, so these politicians are not necessarily indebted to these party bosses anymore. Another thing that they're going to come up with is an initiative. So an initiative is where a group of citizens can actually present legislation to, like, your state Congress or to the federal Congress or anything like that. This usually happens more on the state or local level. Initiatives do. Another idea was a referendum. So this allows citizens to vote directly on proposed laws. So, for example, that fair tax law that you keep seeing, or fair tax amendment, I think it is, that you keep seeing commercials for. So the idea is that because it's a tax hike, the people should have to vote on that. So, and on November 3rd, when your parents or when I go to vote, I can say yes or no on that. And then whatever the majority is, then that either is a law or it is not. And then the last thing is a recall. So if you've ever watched Parks and Recreation, you'll probably be familiar with a recall because this happened to Leslie Knope. So this is where you elect somebody and then maybe they're not who you thought they were going to be. And the people become very disenfranchised with that person. And so they don't want them to continue to serve. And so what they could do is they can vote to recall them. And then if you are recalling them, what that means is you vote to take them out of office before their term is up. Okay, so if you don't like a city councilwoman like Leslie Knope was, and you want to recall her because she's ticking off the Sweetums peoples, then you can recall her. Okay, and so that's kind of what happened there. Another thing is going to be the direct election of senators. So before the 17th Amendment, we elected senators by electing our state legislatures, and then they would select 2 senators. And so these are your 2 senators here. Now, these 2 people, that's Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth, they were elected by direct election because the 17th Amendment is going to take that power away from the state legislatures and give it to the people. Okay, so Dick Durbin is up for re-election. This guy, he's up for re-election this year, and so he's going against, I don't remember the guy's name who's going against him, a Republican, okay, because he's a Democrat. And so you can vote Republican, Democrat, or if there's a Libertarian or Green Party person, you can vote for that. Okay, but you're voting directly for those senators now. But what's important about this is it actually removes a check away from the states to the federal government. So actually what this ends up doing is it actually gives a little more power to the federal government and taking away from the states. Okay, moving on to suffrage movement. So suffrage is the right to vote. And after the Civil War, there's the 14th and 15th Amendments were passed, and that basically gave African Americans the right to vote. But this doesn't include women. And so women who were supported by the abolitionists, they were starting to fight for the right to vote. So there's 2 camps of how to do this. Do it federally with a U.S. constitutional amendment, which that's what's going to end up happening, or allow states to pass voting laws. Okay, and allow the states to make those decisions on who gets to vote. Okay, eventually it is going to be, obviously, the federal government because we have the 19th Amendment. So in 1890, two groups are going to join together, and they're going to create what's called the National American Women's Suffrage Association, the NAWSA, and they are headed by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and that's her right there. Okay, and many middle-class women wanted to join this cause to get these reforms passed because they wanted to be more involved in their government. So they did things like they lobbied lawmakers, they organized marches, they delivered public speeches on women's suffrage, and so they got out in the streets and rallied and protested and got their ideas to be more public. And then Alice Paul, Alice Paul is going to leave the NAWSA, and she's going to start what's called the National Women's Party. She's actually going to be the one who actually organized the March on Washington. But her National Women's Party was a little more radical in that they kind of took these protests a little bit further. They went directly to the White House and picketed the White House. They blocked sidewalks. They chained themselves to lampposts, and they even went on hunger strikes. So in 1915, the NAWSA is going to try to mobilize the suffrage movement, and as more states are going to start to grant women the right to vote, but as more states do this, Congress starts to realize that there's an opportunity here for them. Okay, so in 1918, the House is going to pass an amendment to give women suffrage, but it doesn't pass in the Senate. And during the midterms, so in the 1918 elections, the NAWSA is going to lobby and try to get two anti-suffrage senators to lose their elections, and they do. So in June of 1918, the Senate will then vote again on what will become the 19th Amendment, and then the states ratify that in August of 1920. And so it's November of 1920 that women get to vote for the first time. And so the first president that gets elected with women voting is Warren G. Harding. Reforming society. So children worked in mines and factories in unhealthy and very dangerous conditions, about 10 hours a day. As a result, did not go to school. So you don't get an education, you don't make yourself a better person, you're going to remain in poverty. And so this cycle of poverty is going to continue through the generations. And so what's going to happen is a lot of states are going to start to pass child labor laws, and then eventually that's going to happen at the federal level as well. But these child labor laws, there's a reason why you can't work until you're 16, and it's because of this. It's your job to go to school. It's your job to do a good job, get your education, and go make something of yourself. Okay? It's not your job to go work in a factory for 10 hours a day and try to support your family. Now, in these factories, in these mines, wherever people were working, the conditions were not good. Okay, for the most part, conditions were really very poor, and they didn't have insurance. There was no workers' compensation. So, like, if I worked in a factory and I got my hand stuck in a machine and I can't work because my hand's all mangled, I'm just out of work. I don't make money. Okay, so I don't have any insurance to get this taken care of or anything like that. And so what's going to happen is some states are going to pass laws to combat this. And the event that's really going to bring all this to light of these poor working conditions is the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. So mostly women work there, and that is actually an interesting thing because people. For women, especially a group of women, like men, it's seen as their job to protect women. And when women who are considered to be more vulnerable are taken advantage of, it really kind of hits at the heartstrings. So what happened with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was they were working, a fire broke out, and they couldn't get out. Okay, they couldn't get out off the floor that they were on, out of the building in general, because the doors were locked. Okay, the doors were locked because people had been stealing, and so they locked all the doors. Problem is there's no other way out because there's no fire escape because it had collapsed, and the elevator didn't work. So there was literally no way out, and so these women were just engulfed by this fire. About 150 women died, and their bodies were found by the doors trying to escape because the fire was coming for them. And so very tragic situation, but what's what ended up happening as a result is things like OSHA will eventually be created. And so that's in workplaces, it's like the safety administration. So we have to have fire escapes, we have to have fire drills, we have to have doors that are able to open and lock from the outside. We're supposed to have, there's certain safety regulations that every workplace has to have now, and a lot of that happened because of that fire. Okay. Prohibition movement. So many progressives blame the consumption of alcohol on most of society's problems. So abuse in the home, sickness, crime, poverty, all these things boils down in their minds to alcohol is the problem. Okay, so this is going to lead to what's called the temperance movement. And basically, it was a movement to limit alcohol consumption, but then it's going to lead to the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. So this prohibited production, transport, and sale of alcohol. Now, consumption was legal. Okay, you could consume it, but you can't buy it. Okay, you can't make it. Okay, so the problem is places like Anheuser-Busch, where they're a very big business and they have a lot of people depending on a job. Well, they decided a lot of places like that, like they sold like bread and they sold like cereals and other things like that to stay in business. So they worked through it, and eventually, obviously, this is the only amendment to ever be repealed. And then moving on to big business, so many people thought that businesses needed regulating. So one of the things that's going to get passed is the Sherman Antitrust Act that regulated monopolies. So in recent years, there's been some companies that have come under fire for violating this act, and that would be like Google, Microsoft, Apple have all come under fire for becoming monopolies. And so they have very strict regulations that they have to follow to not violate this act. And then the Interstate Commerce Commission is going to be created. And basically that regulates trade between the states. So if I make something in Illinois and I want to sell it to a business in Missouri, the ICC would regulate that trade. And so as a result of all these issues that were going on, a lot of people thought that socialism was the answer. So socialism being the idea that the government controls all the businesses, they decide what is created, they decide who gets what, and the government makes those decisions for you, so you don't have to. So everything is equal. Okay. The problem is that socialism has never worked. Okay, in the history of socialism, in the history of the world, socialism has never worked. In fact, it's led to the killing of hundreds of millions of people. So the idea is that free enterprise system, it works because that's voluntary trade. If I want to buy something and somebody says, well, that's $5, and I have $5 and I want to exchange that, that's a voluntary transaction. In socialism, the government gets to decide what's made and what the prices are and who gets to buy the things. Okay, so that's total opposite of free enterprise. So free enterprise has won out in the argument of which type of economy is better. All right, that's it. That's all I got for you today. Homework is the acrostic. Make sure you write complete sentences. Have a good day.